They toasted my name while hiding the knife behind their backs. If you've ever smiled through a family dinner, wondering if the love was real, if you've ever felt the air shift like the truth was sitting just outside the room, stay with me. This story's going to hurt. Because betrayal doesn't scream, it whispers, and it always wears the face you love most. I'm Liora Vance. I'm 28. I'm an interior designer based in Seattle, or at least I was before I learned the truth about the people who raised me. But back then, I wasn't chasing clients or sketching dream kitchens. I was at the family retreat, sunburned, barefoot, and drunk on nostalgia, completely unaware that the people clinking glasses beside me had stolen $150,000 from my future. We were celebrating our so-called legacy. The house smelled like old cedar and sea salt. Wind chimes danced against the porch. My mom, Celine, wore her favorite linen dress, white, crisp, ironed within an inch of its life. Jorah, my older brother, had his sleeves rolled up, tan and smug, sipping a neat bourbon. I was sorting through old boxes in the sunroom, laughing about childhood sketches and cracked seashell frames. Then, I saw it. A weathered manila envelope, tucked under a stack of Uncle Adrian's letters. The ink had faded, but the words were unmistakable. Liora's inheritance, private. My breath caught. I ran my finger along the flap, heart thudding. It wasn't sealed. Inside, two things: a typed letter from Uncle Adrian's attorney and an itemized inheritance document, amount allocated to Miss Liora Vance, $150,000. Purpose: educational and creative development. Execution: upon Adrian Vance's passing. I blinked, reread it, then again. My uncle had died 3 years ago. No one had ever mentioned this. A hollow weight settled in my chest. Why wasn't I told? I fumbled through the rest of the envelope, more papers, yellowed email printouts. Subject lines blurred as my fingers began to shake. Diverting funds. Jorah mom, we can use part of it for the yacht. She'll never know. Let's call it a family investment. The corners of the pages curled in my grip, smudged where my thumbs pressed too hard. I didn't hear Jorah step in until his voice cut the silence like a knife. Some legacies, he said lightly, are better kept quiet. I didn't turn. Couldn't. The air had gone thick. Outside, the laughter from the porch felt miles away. I folded the documents slowly, deliberately, and slid them into my bag. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps, casual, like nothing had changed. But everything had. My pulse pounded in my ears. I tasted salt, only it wasn't from the ocean breeze. I cleared my throat, my voice barely more than a whisper. Why would they do this? No one heard, and that made it worse. I moved back to the porch, clutching my bag like armor. Celine looked up from her wine glass, beaming. There she is! What did you find? I smiled, a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else. Just old memories, I said. She laughed. That's all we've got left, huh? The sun was setting over the waves. Golden light lit up her face, so serene, so proud. And I hated how much I still wanted that expression to be real. Jorah caught my eye. He raised his glass. Here's to legacy, he said. I lifted mine. Didn't drink. My hand tightened around the stem. My legs trembled beneath the table. No one noticed. And maybe that's when I realized. They never really had. The celebration continued. Music, stories, clinking forks. But for me, the night had split in half. Before that envelope. And after. Later, in the quiet of my old bedroom, I laid the papers out on the quilt. The emails, the statement, the lie. I traced Uncle Adrian's signature with the edge of my nail. He wanted me to have this. He trusted them. I thought of his voice, warm, raspy, always calling me kiddo. He used to say I saw the world differently, that I'd make it beautiful someday. But they saw a bank account. The ocean outside murmured softly, waves brushing the shore like secrets too tired to scream. I leaned against the windowsill and stared out at the dark silhouettes of my family still gathered by the fire pit. Celine was pouring Jorah another drink. They were laughing. I blinked hard. They took what was mine. Not just the money, the belief that I ever truly belonged. My fingers closed around the papers again, crinkling them in my palm. I whispered to no one. I'll find out why, and I'll make it right. The breeze slipped in through the cracked window. Somewhere outside, a log cracked in the fire, sending sparks into the sky. Inside me, something cracked too. I watched them smile in the firelight, shadows flickering across their faces, and I thought, they say the past doesn't change, but I've learned what you remember and what really happened are rarely the same thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The documents were under my pillow like a loaded gun, and the sound of the ocean, usually comforting, felt like whispers clawing at the windows. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, until the moonlight shifted across the wood-paneled walls, and just like that, my mind pulled me somewhere else. Not to the yacht, not to the betrayal, but to the day I first believed I mattered. I was 8. It was summer, and Uncle Adrian had taken me out to the porch, just us two. The others were inside arguing about some family money thing, typical, but he handed me a paintbrush. "Don't think," he'd said, ruffling my curls. "Just feel the colors." We painted side by side on cheap canvas. Mine was all chaos, blues melting into oranges, seafoam streaked across the sky. His was more deliberate, but he never corrected me. He just watched, like what I made mattered. When I hesitated, he whispered, "This, what you see, what you feel, that's your gift. And someday, there'll be something waiting for you because of it." A breeze passed through the porch, salt air, pine. He smiled, tapping my forehead. "You just keep creating. I'll take care of the rest." I remember thinking, that meant forever. But forever's a funny word in this family. The memory shattered with a creak outside my door. I sat up, heart pounding, footsteps, then silence. I waited until they faded, then tiptoed to the hallway, peering through the slats. Nothing. Just the soft hum of the fridge and the faint flicker of firelight from the still-burning hearth downstairs. I couldn't stay in that house, not with them. I threw on jeans and a hoodie and stuffed the envelope deep into the lining of my duffel bag. My hand brushed against an old photo that had been in there for years. Me and Adrian, paint splattered and grinning. I tucked it in my pocket. The sun was barely up when I slipped out. No goodbyes, no explanations. Seattle was still gray when I pulled into the city. A wet kind of gray, the kind that seeps into your bones. My apartment felt colder than usual, like even the walls didn't know who I was anymore. I dropped the bag on the floor, documents untouched. I should have called someone, anyone. But instead, I stood in the middle of my tiny kitchen, gripping the counter until my knuckles went white. How long had they planned this? Did Celine ever really believe in me? Or was I just some liability to be handled quietly? I opened my laptop, searching through old emails, anything from Adrian, but most had been scrubbed. The last message from him was 3 years ago, one line. "Don't let them box you in, ever." My phone buzzed. Jorah. I stared at the screen until it stopped. Then it buzzed again. Voicemail. I played it. His voice, smooth as ever, oozed charm like he hadn't just gutted me. "Hey, sis. Hope you got home safe. Listen, I know you're probably confused. Don't spiral, all right? We can talk. Things aren't always what they seem." I let the message play out while I opened the fridge, grabbed a half-empty wine bottle, and poured myself a glass with shaking hands. He'd used that line before. Back when he stole credit for my first design pitch at Celine's charity gala. Back when he convinced me Dad's silence was just him processing. Back when I still believed the truth would rise on its own, like cream. I sat on the couch, legs tucked under me, sipping too fast. Was it greed? Control? Did they think I wouldn't fight back? I should have felt powerless. Instead, I felt something else. Anger. Not the explosive kind. The kind that simmers, that seeps into your ribs and makes your spine stiffen. I stood, pulled the envelope from my bag, and laid out every page on the kitchen table. The attorney letter, the inheritance line, the emails, I highlighted the names, circled the bank references. Every lie was right there, black and white. I grabbed a pen and started taking notes, listing dates, connections. My handwriting was sloppy, but my focus was sharp. Then, another sound, outside, near the hallway. I froze. Footsteps? No. A shuffle, like fabric brushing against wood. I crept toward the door and looked through the peephole. Empty. I opened the door just an inch. Nothing, except an envelope. No stamp, no address, just one typed sentence on the front. You were never supposed to find that. The hallway was silent, no one in sight. I backed into my apartment and shut the door, locking it twice. My pulse roared in my ears. Was someone watching me? I looked out the window. A car idled across the street, black, tinted windows. Then it pulled away. I clutched the note, trying not to panic. A new question bloomed beneath the rage. Who else knows? I turned back to the table, eyes landing on the photo of me and Adrian again. I thought I knew what his gift was, but now I wasn't so sure. What if this mess was the real gift? A warning or a test? And just like that, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was about control, legacy, power. And I was about to break all of it wide open. The smell hit me first, damp cedar and old dust, like the air hadn't moved in years. I was back at the beach house, back in the bones of the place, not to see them, not to talk. I was here for truth. The attic stairs groaned beneath me, each step a small betrayal of my weight. I paused halfway up, one hand brushing the railing, the other gripping the flashlight like it could save me. It was quiet, unnaturally so. No ocean breeze, no seagulls, just the silence of wood holding secrets. I reached the top, nudging the warped door open with my shoulder. The hinges protested in a long metallic whine. Everything smelled like forgotten things, old books, cracked boxes, yellowed tax folders. Adrian's handwriting peeked out from one of them, strong, slanted, familiar. I knelt, brushing cobwebs aside, scanning labels, tugging open drawers with the kind of care you give to buried bones. My heart wasn't pounding. It was crawling. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for, until I found it. A metal safe, dusty, low to the floor behind a stack of insulation rolls. I knelt, wiped it clean with the sleeve of my hoodie and stared at the dial. No keyhole, just a 3-digit code. Adrian used to joke he'd never forget my birthday. I spun the dial. 413. Click. I froze. Then slowly pulled the door open. Inside, papers, folders. One manila envelope labeled in blocky, unfamiliar print. Last Will and Testament. Adrian Vance. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. The paper was crisp. Too crisp, the ink too uniform. At first I felt relieved. Maybe this was it. Maybe it confirmed everything. But then I saw the signature. Adrian's name was there, but something was wrong. The slant was off. The loop on the A didn't curl like his usually did. I'd seen his real signature on dozens of birthday cards, art supply receipts, letters. This wasn't it. And worse, this will claimed the $150,000 had been left to Jorah. I stared at the line. I hereby leave the full amount of my liquid assets to my nephew, Liora Vance. No mention of me, no scholarship, no creative fund. My vision blurred. I blinked hard, forcing it away. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos, every page, both sides. Then I called the only person I trusted enough to be honest. Cassie, an old classmate from design school turned part-time paralegal. She picked up on the second ring. Liora? I kept my voice low. Hey, I need your eyes on something. She was quiet for a second. You sound shaken. I am. I sent her the photos, waited in silence while the attic groaned around me. A minute later, her voice came back sharp and focused. This doesn't look right. Not just the signature, the formatting, the notary seal placement, the absence of a witness page. It's bad. Like, fake bad. Could someone have planted it? She exhaled. More like created it. This screams forgery. I sat back on my heels, letting the flashlight roll across the floor. Shadows jumped. My hands were slick with sweat. You need a lawyer, she said, and fast. If they're forging wills, this isn't just family drama anymore. It's fraud. It's a crime. A creak snapped me upright. Not from the house, from behind me. I turned. At the top of the attic stairs stood Jorah, his expression unreadable. One hand on the banister, the other in his pocket like he was settling in for a chat. You weren't supposed to see that, he said calmly. I stuffed the documents into my bag, heart racing. You forged a will, I said. Adrian never left that to you. He didn't flinch. You don't know what Adrian wanted. I rose to my feet, bag clutched tight against my chest. You stole from me. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. You think this is about the money? You were gonna waste it. On dreams. On art. His tone curled around the word like it was something dirty. You mean something real? I shot back. Something he actually believed in? His jaw tensed. A flicker of something behind his eyes. Not guilt, not regret, annoyance. You always thought you were the center of the story, he said. You never were. I backed toward the stairs, refusing to look away. He didn't follow, just stood there, expression unreadable. But as I turned and bolted down the steps, I felt it. A shift. He knew I wasn't scared anymore. I tore through the hallway, out the front door, lungs burning with something worse than fear. Rage. Outside, the wind slapped my face. Gulls shrieked overhead. I didn't stop until I hit the car, keys fumbling in my hand. As I drove, my mind screamed. He was willing to fake a will. What else was he willing to do? Back in my apartment, I locked the door behind me, pulled the curtains, and dropped the bag onto the floor. I sat down with the real documents again. Adrian's original intent, the scholarship breakdown, the emails. One pile told the truth, the other, the lie. And somewhere between them was the answer I needed. But something still didn't sit right. That forged will. Why keep it in a locked safe, hidden in the attic? Why not destroy it? Unless he wanted me to find it. Unless this was all part of a game I didn't know I was playing. I stared at the envelope on the table, then at the door, then at the window, where a shadow briefly moved across the streetlight. Someone was still watching. Not just Jorah, someone else. It wasn't rage that got me back in the car. It was clarity. The kind that comes when you stop begging for truth and start dragging it into the light yourself. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't knock. I just walked straight into the family dining hall, documents in hand, heart thudding like a war drum. They were eating. The table was set like a magazine spread. Cloth napkins, polished silverware, even tapered candles burning at both ends like nothing in the world had gone wrong. Jorah was mid-sip of red wine when he noticed me. His eyes barely flicked. Well, that didn't take long. Celine glanced over her shoulder. Liora, you're not scheduled to be here. I didn't speak. I just walked the length of the table, heels echoing off hardwood, the folder of evidence clutched so tight my fingers had gone numb. I placed it down between the mashed potatoes and the roast lamb. The room shifted. No one moved. I reached into the folder and laid out 3 items, one by one. Adrian's real inheritance letter, the emails, the forged will. Jorah exhaled through his nose, calm, calculated. Celine leaned back slowly, one manicured hand gripping the edge of her chair. My voice, when it finally came, felt like someone else's. You forged a will. You stole what Adrian left me, and you lied to my face. Jorah didn't flinch. That's dramatic. Celine placed her wine glass down, the stem trembling just slightly. Sweetheart, you're misunderstanding the intent. I laughed, quiet, bitter. I read the emails. You called it a family investment. You said I'd never know. Jorah wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin like we were still playing house. You were always too emotional to manage something like that. That line hit harder than I expected. Not because it was new, because it was so familiar. It echoed back to late nights when I cried over failed applications, to Celine patting my hand saying stability matters more than passion, to Jorah rolling his eyes every time I brought up design school. I realized then it wasn't just the money, it was the control. Celine spoke again, her voice suddenly soft, sweet, the kind that could cut glass. You have to understand, Liora. We did what was best for everyone. Adrian, he was sentimental, not practical. Then why hide it? I asked. Why fake his signature? Her smile faltered. Because he didn't understand the pressure we were under. Keeping this family afloat hasn't been easy. Your father left chaos, and Jorah, I cut in, bought a yacht. He smirked. A strategic asset. I almost choked on it. You bought a strategic asset with my inheritance. I waited for shame. I saw none. Instead, Celine's tone hardened. You're being ungrateful. We kept this family's name from becoming a joke. No, I said quietly. You just made sure it became a lie. The air grew thick. Even the candles seemed to burn slower. I looked around at the table, silverware untouched, food going cold. A perfect illusion, crumbling at the seams. "Do you really think Adrian wouldn't find out?" I asked. Celine's jaw tightened. Jorah's smirk vanished. Silence. A flicker of something passed between them, too fast to catch, but I saw it. Something unspoken. That's when I knew. There was more. More than the money. More than the forgery. They weren't just protecting themselves. They were hiding something else. I gathered the papers back into the folder, slow and deliberate. Jorah leaned forward, voice low. "You go public with this. You'll destroy what's left of this family." I tilted my head. Maybe it deserves to be destroyed. His smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't want war, Liora." "I'm not afraid of it," I said. And I wasn't. I turned and walked out, never once looking back. The hallway felt colder than before. My chest was tight, not from fear, but something close to grief, not for them. For who I used to be. Naive, hungry for their approval, easy to silence. That girl was gone. I drove in silence, hands white-knuckling the wheel. Back home, I laid the folder on the counter, but my mind couldn't stop spinning. What else were they hiding? Why did Celine seem more afraid than angry? And what had passed between them so quickly, so quietly? When I mentioned Adrian, I stared out the window again. The same dark sedan was parked across the street, lights off, engine silent, watching, or waiting. I stepped back, heart thumping. A chill ran down my arms. This wasn't over, and I was no longer just chasing justice. I was chasing a secret I didn't yet understand. It was the second night in a row I couldn't sleep. The window blinds were shut tight, but I could still feel the eyes. I sat at the kitchen table, barefoot, wrapped in my dad's old flannel robe I hadn't worn since college. The fabric was thin at the elbows now, but it smelled like cedar and soap, and for 5 seconds I could pretend I was safe. Then the floor creaked, not inside, in the hallway. My blood froze. I held my breath and crept toward the front door, every nerve humming. I checked the peephole, empty. But when I opened the door, something fluttered to the floor. A note, typed, no envelope, just a single sheet of paper, center-aligned text in jet black ink. "They're watching you, dig deeper." No name, no signature. My throat tightened. I looked down the hall. All the other doors were closed. No sound, no movement. But I knew what I felt. Paranoia is messy. It whispers things you can't prove but feel deep in your bones. And right now, it was screaming. I shut the door, locked it twice, then backed away like the hinges might betray me. I read the note again. "They're watching you." I paced the apartment, note in hand. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. I turned off the lights, peeked through the blinds. That same dark sedan from before was across the street again. Idling, silent. It didn't move. But neither did I. Instead, I dug out everything, every document, every scrap of paper from the safe, every email I'd printed. They were too clean, too complete, almost convenient. That's when it hit me. I'd only seen the paper trail they allowed to exist. What was missing? My fingers trembled as I opened Adrian's letter again. I scanned the margins. Nothing. But then, on the final page, something odd. A smudge. Right in the lower corner. Faint. Almost invisible unless you tilted it against the light. It wasn't dirt. It was ink. Handwritten. One word. Key. I blinked. Squinted. Was it a note? A reference? I turned the page over. Nothing on the back. Nothing else written. Just key. My heart ticked faster. My mind leapt to the beach house. The attic had 1,000 nooks. But there was another space. One I hadn't searched. The crawl space. Back when I was a kid, I used to hide there during storms. Adrian had reinforced it, added padding, insulation, even a little desk lamp. It had always been my secret cave. I never told anyone about it. If Adrian had left me a trail, that's where it would lead. The next morning, I drove before the sun rose, rain slicing across the windshield like tiny knives. The roads were slick, empty, fogged in mystery. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot beside the house, dawn had broken, but barely. The house looked still, but not empty. I parked far from the front, circling around to the back porch where the wooden slats creaked with memory. I moved fast, unlocking the basement hatch and ducking into the crawl space. It smelled like dust and mold and something long forgotten. I clicked on my phone flashlight and moved slowly, careful not to scrape against the rusted nails along the joists. My breath clouded in front of me, cold, stale air curling through the narrow space. I reached the far corner where the insulation bunched up behind the support beams. I yanked it aside. Nothing. Then I noticed it, half buried under a loose floorboard, a small velvet pouch. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Inside, a key. Old, heavy, bronze, with one word etched into the side. Vance. It wasn't from the house. It didn't match anything I'd ever seen. What did it open? I didn't get the chance to think it through, because the moment I turned to crawl out, I heard it. Footsteps above me. Slow, measured. I held my breath. 1, 2, 3 steps. Then silence. The house door creaked, opened, shut. Someone had been there, but not for long. By the time I got out, whoever it was had gone. No tire marks, no engine noise. Just mist on the grass and my own breath fogging the air. I slid the key into my coat pocket and pressed a hand against my chest to calm my racing heart. Back in the car, I turned the heat up, gripping the wheel with shaking hands. I kept hearing it, those footsteps, that brief, awful pause, and the way the crawlspace had suddenly felt like a trap. I reached into my pocket and touched the key again, pressing it between my fingers until they went white. Someone had left this for me, but someone else didn't want me to find it, and now I had no choice. I had to follow wherever it led. I didn't go home, not after what I found, not with the weight of that key in my coat pocket. Instead, I drove across the city, letting instinct steer me somewhere I hadn't been in months, the art studio. It sat on the corner of a graffiti-covered street in Capitol Hill, tucked between a boarded-up bookstore and a coffee shop that never turned off its jazz. Inside, the smell hit me like a memory: linseed oil, acrylic paint, dust, and life. The lights were still off, but I knew the way. I walked past old canvases and mismatched easels until I reached the far back, Taryn's corner. She wasn't expecting me, but she didn't flinch. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sketching on a giant piece of butcher paper with charcoal-streaked hands. Her blonde hair was tied up in a messy knot, and her eyes, when they met mine, didn't ask questions. Just, "You okay?" I tried to say yes. I nodded instead. She patted the floor next to her. I sank down, legs folding underneath me. I handed her the key without a word. She turned it over in her palm, eyebrows pinching. "Looks antique, that etching." She squinted at it. "Vance?" I nodded again, this time slower. "That's your family name, right?" "Yeah," I said. My voice came out low and cracked. "I found it in the crawl space, hidden, behind insulation, after someone left me a note warning they're watching." She looked up, brows lifting just enough to say, "You're serious." Then, without skipping a beat, she asked, "Have you told anyone else?" "No." She stood and walked to the corner cabinet, came back with a sketch pad, and set it in front of me like it was a life raft. "Draw," she said, "or talk, or both. Just don't sit there and drown." I hesitated, then picked up a pencil. Lines came first, then shapes. I didn't even realize what I was sketching until halfway through, an old oak tree, the one by Adrian's grave, but its roots were twisted, cut open, and buried inside the key. Taryn watched, but didn't interrupt. When I stopped, she asked, "What would Adrian say right now?" I stared at the drawing. He'd say, "Paint the storm. Don't let it paint you." She smiled. "Sounds like a good man." "He was." My throat tightened. "The only one who ever saw me." I looked down at my charcoal-covered hands. "And now I don't even know what he left behind, or why this is happening." She leaned back against the wall. "Maybe this key doesn't unlock a thing. Maybe it unlocks a story." We sat there in silence for a while. Then she said, "You need help, real help, legal, investigative, public." I flinched. Taryn stood and pulled out her phone. "I know someone. She's a journalist. Not mainstream, but solid. Does exposes on corporate and family corruption. She might listen." "Might?" "She owes me," she said with a grin. "Back in college, I didn't rat her out for setting the kiln on fire." 15 minutes later, we were seated across from Ilori Reed. She looked exactly how I remembered from college parties. Sharp bob, sharper stare, and a way of listening that made you feel like the truth was about to be extracted whether you liked it or not. Ellery tapped her pen against her journal. "So, You're telling me your mother and brother forged a will, stole your inheritance, and may be hiding more. And now there's a mystery key, and someone's watching you? Yes. She raised an eyebrow. Any proof? I reached into my bag and slid out the folder. Documents, emails, photos, everything. Her eyes scanned quickly, trained. This is substantial, she muttered. Then her tone shifted. But it's risky. You sure you want to take this public? No, I said. But I'm more sure I can't keep hiding. She closed the folder, tapped the edge twice. I'll start digging. But if you want this published, I need more. Photos, audio, something undeniable. Taryn leaned forward. She's not alone anymore. Ilori looked between us. Good, because they're not going to take this lying down. There was something cold in her voice, something that made me shiver. Later that night, back in Taryn's apartment, too wired to sleep, too shaken to cry, I sat on the balcony with the key in one hand and a glass of water in the other. Seattle's skyline blinked in and out behind misted rain. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement like ghost footsteps. I could still feel that watcher, not in sight, but near. Taryn stepped out with a blanket and draped it over my shoulders without saying anything. You're sure Ellery can be trusted? I asked. She'll chase the truth even if it bites. I looked down at the key again, running my thumb across the Vance engraving. I don't know what it opens, I whispered. Then maybe it's not about the lock, she said. Maybe it's about proving you've got the guts to go find it. I held the key tighter. I didn't have answers yet, but I had allies. And I had a story. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark. Not just anger, not just fear. Something close to readiness. But even as I tried to breathe into that feeling, a thought crawled back in. If someone left me this key to lead me towards something, who was trying so hard to keep me away? I didn't want to go public. I wanted to handle it quietly. I wanted to believe my family could be confronted and changed, but they left me no choice. By the time I handed the folder over to Ellery, I knew what would happen, and still I wasn't ready. It dropped late Friday night on a mid-tier Seattle investigative news site. The headline hit like a hammer. Family legacy or financial theft? Inheritance scandal rocks Vance estate. There was a photo of Jorah leaning smugly against the side of the yacht. One of Celine at a gala, clutching pearls and smiling like she hadn't gutted me. The article named names, detailed the forgery, quoted the emails, linked the yacht to the diverted funds, and listed me as the sole intended heir. By Saturday morning, it had been shared over 2,000 times. By noon, it was on Reddit. By evening, it hit local TV. I watched it all from my apartment, hunched on the floor with my laptop open, refreshing the comments with trembling fingers. There were people who believed me, others who didn't, but it didn't matter anymore. The silence was broken. My phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Same number. The third time, I answered. Liora. Jorah. His voice was clipped, controlled. You need to take it down. I said nothing. You've made your point. It's enough. You're hurting people. I laughed, sharp, bitter. People? You mean you and Mom? I mean the family, the name. I'm done protecting your version of it. There was a long pause, then low and cold. You're going to regret this. He hung up. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. For a second I thought I might cry, but instead I stood. I went outside. And that's when I heard it, chanting. At first I thought it was music from a passing car, but no, it was real. It was organized. I followed the sound around the block and froze. A crowd had gathered outside the Vance Beach House, dozens of people, some with signs, some with cameras. Truth over legacy! Justice for Liora! I stood on the edge of the street, coat pulled tight around me, stunned. They were here, for me. I hadn't asked them to come. I hadn't even known they would, but somehow the story reached them, and they showed up. Across the lawn, the porch light flicked on. Celine stepped out, flanked by Jorah. For the first time in my life, she looked small. Not fragile, just reduced. A woman whose mask had slipped. Her gaze found mine. Even across the distance, I saw the flicker of something. Panic? Guilt? No, just anger, tightly leashed. Jorah leaned close and whispered something into her ear. She didn't nod, didn't move. She just stared at me. And in that moment, I remembered something. Something small. Years ago, when I was 15, I overheard Celine on the phone in the pantry. She was crying. "I can't do this without him," she said. "Adrian's will, it's not going to hold." I hadn't understood what she meant back then. Now I did. Adrian had tried to protect me, but Celine, she had started erasing him even before the ink dried. The crowd began to chant louder. I stepped back from the sidewalk and made my way to a nearby alley to breathe. That's when my phone buzzed. A new message from Ellery. "Liora, someone just emailed me anonymously. They say there's more. They have files about Celine. Meet me ASAP." My heart dropped into my stomach. "More?" I texted back. "Where?" "Studio. Come now. It's big." I shoved the phone into my coat and broke into a run, the sound of protesters echoing behind me. Back inside the warmth of Taryn's studio, I found Ellery already there, pacing. She looked up. "You're not going to believe this." She turned the laptop toward me. An encrypted email. No name, no sender metadata. But the attachments, PDFs, scans, screenshots, were real. One caught my eye. A bank transfer log. $30,000 wired to a private account in Belize, signed by Liora Vance. "What's this?" I asked, barely breathing. Ellery pointed to the memo line. "Private Consulting, Will Revision Strategy." The screen blurred for a second as my vision pulsed with shock. "Whoever sent this," Ellery said, "they knew what they were doing, and they want it out. Do you trust them?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to, because suddenly the floor shifted under me again. The scandal I thought I'd cracked open? It was only the first layer. Something deeper was coming. Something more dangerous. The thing about power, real power, is that it doesn't need to shout. It just waits. Patient, strategic. Then it crushes you when you're off balance. I was still riding the momentum of the article, the protest, the anonymous leak. But momentum doesn't mean safety. It was Sunday morning when they came for me. 2 officers, plain clothes, calm voices. "Liora Vance?" I stood there in Taryn's doorway, wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, my hair still damp from the shower. "Yes? We have a warrant. You're being placed under arrest for will forgery and fraud." My mouth opened, but no words came out. Taryn stepped between us, instinctive. "You must have the wrong person." "We don't," one of them said. "She can explain everything at the station." They read me my rights as they cuffed my wrists. Cold metal. Hot shame. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But inside, I cracked. The car ride was silent except for the buzz of the police radio. I stared out the window as the city blurred past. Buildings I knew, places I'd once felt at home in, all of it now foreign. They held me in a windowless room that smelled like stale coffee and bleach. No one said much. No one had to. After what felt like hours, a woman walked in, mid-40s, professional, sharp lines in her blazer and sharper ones in her face. "I'm Detective Renner," she said, setting down a thick file. "We received a complaint. Documents, email evidence, testimony from a family member. It paints a pretty ugly picture." She slid a photo across the table. It was a copy of the forged will, the same one Jorah had planted, but this one had my name typed into the metadata. "Forgery software, time-stamped. It traces back to your device." I stared at it, cold settling into my stomach like wet cement. "That's not mine," I whispered. "That's not how I found it." She leaned forward, eyes narrow. "So someone else forged it, stored it on your system, and then gave you a copy?" "Yes." "Do you have proof?" I hesitated. Thought of the safe, the attic, my crawlspace discoveries. "All of my documents were real. I can show you." "You'll have your chance," she said flatly. They released me late that night. No charges filed yet, but a looming, pending review stamped across every breath I took. Celine was waiting outside, not with arms open, not even with anger, just calm cruelty. She didn't speak until I passed her. Then, low enough for only me. "You always thought being loud made you strong, but real strength, it's quiet, strategic." I turned to face her. "You framed your own daughter." She tilted her head. "I protected the family name." I laughed, bitter, dry. "No, you protected your ego." Her eyes flickered. For one heartbeat, she looked human again. Then it vanished. She turned and walked away, heels clicking like punctuation marks in a sentence I never agreed to write. Taryn met me at the curb, wrapped me in a blanket, didn't ask anything. Ellery was already on her phone, storming down the sidewalk with fury in her voice and fire in her eyes. "We'll fight this," she said. "They wanted you rattled. That means they're scared." I nodded, but my mind was already somewhere else. The files, the anonymous leak, the key. This wasn't just about fraud anymore. This was strategy, layers, years in the making. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that will, with my name on it, perfectly forged, like someone had rehearsed my downfall 100 times before it hit the stage. At dawn, I sat on the balcony with Taryn's sketchpad in my lap. I didn't draw, I wrote, everything I could remember. Every room, every conversation, every odd glance. And then I remembered something. 4 years ago, Jorah had cornered me at one of Celine's fundraising galas. He'd been drinking, smug and mean in equal measure. "You think Adrian gave you that money 'cause he believed in your talent?" he'd said. "No, he just didn't trust us with it. That should tell you something." Back then, I'd thought he was just being cruel. But now, maybe Adrian knew exactly what they were capable of. He just hadn't lived long enough to stop them. The next morning, Ellery sent me a single message. "Come to the beach. Something's there. You need to see it yourself." No explanation. No context. Just urgency. I left within the hour, but as I pulled into the gravel lot, something strange happened. The same sedan, the one that had been watching, was there. Only this time, it wasn't empty. A figure in the driver's seat, eyes hidden behind tinted glass. And as I stepped out of my car, the door of the sedan cracked open, just enough to let me know I wasn't alone anymore. There's a moment when fear stops being sharp and starts to sink, like wet concrete around your ankles. That photo, the one of me on the beach, didn't just shake me, it hollowed me out. I hadn't told anyone I was going there, and yet the angle, the distance, the timestamp, someone had followed me, watched me dig, and waited to send proof, not to threaten, to warn. I stared at the image on Ellery's laptop, breath caught in my chest. Taryn hovered near the window, peeking through the blinds like she expected the hooded figure to be standing outside. Ellery's voice was low but urgent. "This is deeper than just Jorah and Celine. Someone else is pulling strings." She tapped the photo. "They knew where you'd be before I did, before you did." I shook my head, still holding the rusted key from the beach. My fingers were red from gripping it too tight. "What does this open?" I murmured. "And who's watching me find it?" I sat down hard on the edge of the couch. My body felt heavier than it should have. Every breath scraped. Taryn crossed the room and gently pulled the key from my palm. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. Ellery was already back at her keyboard, fingers flying. That email contained more metadata than I thought. I think the files they teased us with. They might be real records, bank ledgers, personal notes, and something labeled Adrian Vault Logs. My pulse kicked. Vault. "What kind of vault?" I asked. "Don't know yet. It was password locked. But with the new key metadata from this photo," she turned the screen, "I might be able to cross-reference coordinates. If I'm right, there's a location embedded in the file tags." "A location?" I repeated. "Like GPS?" Ellery nodded slowly. "A real place, maybe even the place." The world felt like it tilted. "Then let's go," I said. But Ellery didn't move. She hesitated, just for a second, that pause that says, "There's something you need to hear first." "What?" I asked, voice tighter than I meant it. She turned the laptop toward me. There was another email. It had just come in. "You're close, but the second key is cursed. Use it, and someone else pays the price." Underneath was another attachment. A scanned note, handwritten in familiar ink. Adrian's. I recognized the sharp tilt of his R's, the cross on his T's like a dagger. It read, "The safe holds the truth, but it's surrounded by lies. Protect her, even from herself." I blinked. "Her?" Ellery looked up. "You think it's about you?" "No," I whispered. "I think he meant Celine." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Taryn's voice, soft and steady. "What did he know about her that we don't?" The question buzzed in the air like static. I thought back, way back, to a night when I was 10, curled up on the stairs, eavesdropping on a conversation between Adrian and my mother. Adrian had been pleading, "You promised not to do this again, Celine." And her reply, "I made that promise before he died. Everything changed after that." I hadn't understood at the time, but now... "Who was she talking about?" I said aloud. "Who died before Adrian?" None of us had the answer, but we all felt it, another thread unraveling. That evening, we made the drive. Ellery had pulled GPS coordinates from the email metadata, just outside Port Townsend, near a closed-down Vance-owned vineyard. The place was abandoned, vines overgrown, fencing rusted, the scent of pine and rot lingering in the wind. We walked the property with flashlights, gravel crunched beneath our feet. A hawk cried in the trees above. Then we saw it. A small stone building, half swallowed by ivy, tucked behind a collapsed storage shed. The cellar. Its iron door was sealed with a lock, ancient, corroded, engraved with the family crest. The key in my hand slid in without resistance. Click. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Dust swirled under the beams of our flashlights. Shelves lined the walls, boxes, ledgers, sealed envelopes, and in the center of the room, a wooden chest. Ellery crouched beside it, slowly lifting the lid. Inside, a cassette recorder, dozens of tapes labeled by date, a thick folder labeled Estate Diversion Plan, Phase 1-3. And at the very bottom, a small velvet box. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a USB drive and a single photo. Adrian, me, and someone I didn't recognize. A man, tall, sharp-eyed, standing between Adrian and Celine's hand was gripping his, hard. Taryn whispered behind me, "Who is that?" I didn't know, but I knew what I felt. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was bloodline, history, a cover-up, a fracture, and that man, whoever he was part of it. I stared down at the drive. Whatever it held, it was about to blow everything open. It's strange what silence sounds like when it's about to end. Not peaceful, not calm, but sharp, heavy, waiting. That's how the retreat felt when we returned. Me, Ellery, and Taryn, armed with everything we'd found in the vault. The tapes, the logs, the USB. And that photo, the one with Celine gripping the hand of a man I didn't recognize but couldn't stop staring at. We didn't call ahead, didn't warn anyone. I needed to look them in the eye. The drive up was quiet. Gray clouds hung low over the cliffs, and the sea below was choppy, restless, like it knew something was coming. As we pulled into the long gravel driveway, the wind picked up, scattering pine needles across the porch. The lights were already on. They knew we were coming. Celine opened the door before I even knocked. Her face was calm, serene even, but her hands, she kept them behind her back. She looked at the three of us, then stepped aside without a word. Inside, the fireplace was burning, warm, inviting, a lie. Jorah sat in the chair closest to it, legs crossed, sipping coffee like he was hosting brunch instead of bracing for an implosion. "You brought an audience," he said, glancing at Ellery. "I brought the truth," I said. I walked to the center of the room, set the USB on the coffee table like a weapon. Taryn moved beside me, her silence steadying. Ellery pulled out her phone and began recording without asking. Jorah's gaze flicked to the device. "Still chasing ghosts, huh?" I ignored him. I turned to Celine. "Who is he?" I asked, holding up the photo. "The man standing between you and Adrian, the one whose name isn't anywhere in our records." She didn't flinch, but her silence was an answer. "He knew," I said, voice breaking. "Adrian knew everything. That's why he created the vault. That's why he left me the keys." Celine finally stepped forward, her voice cold. "You shouldn't have opened it." That hit harder than I expected. "You mean I wasn't supposed to know?" She tilted her head. "Some truths don't protect. They destroy." I held up the folder. "You framed me for forgery. You buried Adrian's voice. You manipulated the will. And now I know why." Jorah stood. "Enough." "No," I snapped. "You're done talking." I pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker, clicked it on, and pressed play. Adrian's voice filled the room, grainy but clear. "If this reaches Liora, it means they went through with it. Celine always said blood comes before legacy. I should have known what she'd do. The truth is the money was never the only thing. It's about what they covered up, about who really owned this house, the accounts, the vineyard. Liora, if you're listening, protect yourself, and whatever you do, don't trust the family name. Silence, thick, tangled. Celine's jaw trembled. Jorah turned away, staring into the fire like it could erase everything. Taryn took my hand. I didn't realize I was shaking until her fingers steadied mine. Ellery lowered the phone slowly. "You're done," she said. "The press will run this in hours. The audio, the ledgers, the proof of forgery, every piece." And that's when Celine snapped. She turned to me, eyes wild, voice sharp. "You don't understand what Adrian did. He cut me out. He left you the legacy meant for both of us." My voice was barely above a whisper. "Because he trusted me, and you proved him right." "Is that what this is?" she spat. "A crusade for the truth? Or revenge?" I stepped closer. "It's survival." And that's when Jorah lunged. I didn't see it coming. 1 second he was by the fire. The next, he was across the room grabbing for the speaker. I shoved him back, but his shoulder knocked the table. The USB clattered to the floor. "Stop!" Taryn shouted. But Jorah didn't listen. He grabbed my arm, shoving me backwards. That's when Ellery moved, fast and firm, jamming her elbow into his ribs. He staggered, gasping. I snatched the USB, backing away. "This ends now," I said, breath heaving. Celine looked at me with something close to desperation. "You think exposing us will bring Adrian back? Will make the pain go away?" "No," I said. "But maybe it stops the rot from spreading." We walked out, all three of us. No one followed. Outside, the air was colder than before. The sky cracked open with a distant roll of thunder. I stood on the porch for a long moment, looking back at the house that held every lie I'd ever believed, and in that moment I realized this was never just about inheritance. It was about ownership, of truth, of story, of self. Back in the car, Ellery looked over. "We go public tonight?" I nodded, but before I could speak, my phone buzzed. A blocked number. I answered, a low voice. Male, calm. "You think you've won, but you haven't even opened the last file." Click. The call ended. I stared at the screen, the wind howling louder around us. What file? What was still waiting? The last file. Even now, the words echo in my mind like a dare. I hadn't opened it yet. Not out of fear, at least not the obvious kind, but because everything up until now had been built on knowing. And this was the last unknown. But first, I needed air. Real air. New air. 3 weeks had passed since the showdown at the retreat. Jorah had disappeared from public view. Celine hadn't spoken to the press once. Ellery's report exploded online. The article, the audio, the forged will. The photo of me holding the USB in front of the retreat had been shared so many times I'd lost count. But none of it felt like closure. Until today. I stood inside a small space that had once been just a sketch in the back of my notebook. A daydream to keep me breathing when everything else was falling apart. Now it was real. My studio. The glass storefront let in morning light, cutting soft golden stripes across the concrete floor. Paintings lined the walls, some mine, some from local artists who'd once been ignored. A corkboard held pinned letters from people who had read the story and written to say, "You gave me permission." I didn't feel like a hero, but I felt awake. Taryn hovered by the back counter, fussing over a vase of wildflowers. She didn't say anything, just gave me a thumbs up, like she was trying to keep her tears at bay. Ellery arrived next, holding 2 coffees and a crooked grin. "You did it," she said. I nodded. We did. Outside, the community had gathered, not hundreds, just a few dozen. But they mattered. Artists, survivors. Strangers who'd seen the news and decided I wasn't invisible anymore. I stepped outside. The air was crisp, scented with distant rain and fresh pavement. A few camera flashes went off. I blinked into them, not shrinking back. This time I stood taller, and then I spoke. Not a speech, just words. Every brushstroke I ever made was an attempt to belong, and I was told over and over that it wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. I looked around. Faces. Real. Listening. But I've learned that belonging isn't something they give you. It's something you claim. Applause rippled, but it wasn't loud. It was warm, earnest. Taryn leaned in and whispered, "Adrian would have loved this." I smiled. "He's already here." Back inside, I sat behind my new desk, the coffee warm in my hands. And that's when I opened the file. It was just one document, a letter, to whom it may concern, estate clarification, written in Adrian's handwriting, digitized, signed, dated. But it wasn't about me. It was about him, the man in the photo, the one Celine never mentioned. His name was David Albrecht. And according to Adrian, he was my father. Not the man I grew up calling Dad. Not the one who'd vanished from our lives when I was 7. This man had been written out of the family completely. But Adrian had kept the records, photos, dates, financial support documents. It hit me like a storm I hadn't prepared for. Not because I felt betrayed, but because suddenly everything made sense. Celine had erased him, cut him out, cut me off, and justified it as legacy protection. But the truth? She couldn't bear the reminder of a love that didn't revolve around control. Taryn found me an hour later, still staring at the file. "You okay?" I handed her the tablet. She read in silence, then, "Do you want to find him?" I didn't answer. Not yet. That night, I closed up the studio alone. The wind had picked up. Rain tapped against the windows like it had something urgent to say. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the dark street. The city shimmered, wet, golden, alive. And that's when I saw him. A man across the street, hands in pockets, face hidden under the brim of a hat. He didn't move, didn't wave. But he stood exactly like the man in the photo. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. The man across the street didn't move. A brimmed hat shadowed his face, but something in his posture, still, composed, almost familiar, held me. And then he nodded. Just once. A slow, deliberate motion, like punctuation at the end of a sentence I hadn't dared to write. By the time I crossed the street, he was gone. But something inside me had shifted. I didn't chase him. Didn't need to. I finally understood. Some stories don't need full reunion. They just need recognition. 2 days later, the last of the tapes from the vault were transcribed. Adrian's voice, tired but clear, had walked us through every shadow. The offshore accounts Jorah tried to bury, the legal safeties Adrian put in place under a different name, the secret trust. The final file, the one the caller warned me about, was a letter of instruction. Adrian had written it to his lawyer. It included one last transfer of funds, $50,000, stored in a sealed trust under my name, hidden from Celine, protected by clauses she couldn't undo. I read the letter twice, then closed my eyes. He never gave up on me, even when I had no idea I was worth protecting. We met with Adrian's lawyer that afternoon. Ellery had all the evidence prepared, the altered will, the voice recordings, the bank statements. It was airtight. Jorah tried to lawyer up, but the case moved quickly. Public pressure had turned. There were protests outside the vineyard, articles, hashtags, people demanding consequences. Celine disappeared from public life. She released a single statement, thick with spin and denial, but it didn't stick. The truth had shape now, and teeth. I didn't gloat. Not when the yacht was seized, not when Jorah's accounts were frozen, not even when the forged will was declared criminal fraud. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about return, of what was taken, of who I used to be. 1 month later, I stood in the middle of my studio as we unveiled our first public exhibit, Legacy Redefined. Every piece told a story. Some were mine. Some were submitted anonymously by people who said my story gave them permission to share theirs. One painting hung by the front window, bright strokes across deep shadows. It was called Inheritance. Not the money, the fight, the freedom. Taryn smiled at me across the room, her hair tied up in a messy bun, charcoal smudged on her wrist. Ellery hovered near the coffee station, chatting with a local reporter, laptop tucked under her arm like a sidearm. People kept stopping to ask how it all happened, and I just said, it didn't happen all at once. It happened the moment I stopped shrinking. Later that night, after the lights dimmed and the guests cleared out, I sat alone in the center of the studio. The USB was still in my pocket. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me where I'd been, what it cost to get here. There's one final thing Adrian said in the last recording, something quiet, like he was talking just to me. Liora, if you're hearing this, it means you kept going, even when it burned, even when no one clapped, and that means I was right about you all along. I pressed my palm to my chest, grounding myself. He was right, not because I exposed them, but because I didn't become them. And maybe that's the lesson. You don't have to be what they handed you. You can build something different, something true. Thank you for staying with me through every twist, every secret, every betrayal. If my story meant something to you, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a comment, or share it with someone who's fighting for their own truth. And if you're ready for another story, maybe one with just as many secrets, I'll meet you in the next one.